Thank you very much to Frank, Paul, June, and Peter for the presentations. The floor is now open to you, all of you, and also to those online. If there are any questions online, please put your virtual hand up in the Adobe. But first question on my right here, please.
I'm Barbara Westerholm, representing AGE. My question is, have you any idea about the underreporting of adverse reactions from the different countries?
So I understand that some of this will come from Francois, but perhaps Paul or Mick, do you want to answer?
Thanks very much. I guess I can only probably speak from a UK perspective. I know that there's been many studies done at sort of underreporting of adverse drug reactions, and I think the most important fact is obviously understanding that some drugs have a lot more attention, and therefore underreporting may be less. But I think estimates vary between, I think, sometimes 5 to 10% of adverse drug reactions being reported. That might be sometimes up to 50%, I think, in some papers I've seen for drugs that maybe under additional monitoring have that sort of attention. But I think it's a massively wide variety, and it's obviously something that we're continuing to tackle, and that's part of what I hope Scope will help national regulators to improve. Don't know if Mick wants to add anything.
Yeah, I think all systems globally suffer from a level of underreporting, and the WHO have done some work on this, and as Paul said, Scope is looking at some of these questions on how best to promote ADR reporting. And one of the things that we're looking to learn from is what works well in some countries, and how can we build the capacity across the network to actively promote ADR reporting from not just consumers but healthcare professionals as well. And one of the other things that we'll be looking at is what has worked in terms of technical and practical implementation. For example, some countries have ADR reporting within various clinical systems so that the healthcare professional finds it easy to report and it's second nature to report. So how can we use IT to further reporting? So that's another important area that we'll look at.
Thank you. Please.
Yeah.
Here on my right. Yeah, yourself.
Marita Smigelov from Novo Nordisk, representing Europa Bio. I have a question to June, and I'm pretty sure I'm covering the entire industry. I think it was a very interesting status you have given, and you also indicated that 6 to 7%, only 6 to 7% of all signals goes to referrals. As majority of companies are working worldwide, could you do an effort to explain countries outside the Europe, and I'm pretty sure US also know it, but at least rest of the world, that only 60% causes actually those referrals? Because what we can see from the company is that the rest of the world, with all those signals, really raise a lot of noise of approvals in those countries.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And I think your question touches not just on how signals are managed, but the transparency around that. We fully appreciate at PRAC, when the signals are published before the meeting, that this will be of interest, not just in the EU, but internationally. We have now, and I think many colleagues from the industry here will know, a capacity to help the MAH by prior knowledge. So that's one thing. And secondly, we also, thanks to EMA initiative, have a number of interactions with international jurisdictions in the other parts of the world, such as the FDA, Canada, Japan, Australia, and so on. So there are, if you like, safeguards to address any possible misunderstanding and to make sure that what we're looking at is very clear to the international colleagues that are interested in the medicines whose signals we're investigating. I hope that helps address a little, but I think that there'll be further opportunities to explore communications and advance information today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Hi, Liz Swain from FPIA. My question is regarding Scope project. So we heard that, and we quite understand why it's inappropriate for industry to have a place on the governance task force of Scope. But obviously in the industry and in the trade associations, we're seeing a lot of the different interpretations that are taking place around the legislation from the different member states. And we were wondering if there was an efficient way, other than waiting for the stakeholder meeting in the first quarter, to feed through some of those things where we think there may be misunderstandings or different understandings in different member states that could perhaps be included in the survey and help prioritise those areas that Scope focused on to start off with.
Thanks very much for the question. I think it's a really key point. I think the purpose of Scope is really around supporting member states to operate their systems to the sort of templates and processes that are in place. And I'm sure we recognise that with the new legislation, that different member states may be sort of following the new processes to a greater or lesser extent. I don't know what the answer is, I'm afraid. I wonder if any EMA colleagues would be able to advise, but I think it's important, obviously, to gather that feedback and understand when maybe the efficiencies we intend to put in place aren't being made the most of. I'm sure that any sort of intelligence gathered through the Scope, we'll certainly make sure we feed back to the EMA and the relevant groups. But I wonder if anyone could advise where a most appropriate form might be.
Well, I think, and tomorrow morning we have a second or even third of focus sessions with industry associations. So perhaps that's one good platform. And I understand some of the key issues with the big topics, at least, are being raised in those meetings. Is that perhaps a yeah? Okay. So perhaps there is a starting place, and then we could discuss further how to adjust even with smaller things. Then please.
My name is Christoph Thalheim, and I represent the European Multiple Sclerosis Platform. My question is to Peter Arlett. What is, in your definition, an old substance, which you mentioned in your presentation? How old is that?
Most people say that it gets shorter as people get older or something, but I can't remember which slide I was referring to. Generally, when we talk about old or established is another term that we use, it tends to be where there's more than one product on the market containing a particular active substance. That generally is what we mean. And generally, as a rule of thumb, that's about 10 years after something innovative comes on the market, then you get generics coming on. But that's very, very much a rule of thumb. Thank you.
Yes, hi, Ansela Santos from Health Action International. I have a couple of questions. One to Peter Arlett. Is it possible to see the data on spontaneous reporting per country and not just aggregated and by patients and healthcare professionals? And then to Mr. Paul Barrow, when do you expect to publish the results of the work package 4? So the report on best practices on ADR collection.
Yes, I'm very pleased to say that Francois Oyer's presentation later on will specifically show the by country, both overall and I think by patient also. So I leave it to Francois.
Thanks very much. I'm just quickly opening up the project plan, and basically work package 4 is delivering probably around month 24 to 26 the sort of outputs, which is, I guess, the end of the second year. So approximately about 12 to 14 months' time for adverse drug reaction reporting focus.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just take one last question now.
Sarah Montaigne, representing FPIA. I'd like to say thank you for the interesting presentations. Quite impressive, all the statistics and the procedures and all of the work that's been achieved. I think I'm very pleased from the FPIA perspective to note that we now talk of prioritization from compliance to optimization. And also, I think Peter talks about simplification. I think there's two things really. What we see from the industry perspective with these rigorous timescales as well, when we have all these new procedures with rigorous timescales, I think we are seeing across the industry a demand for engagement, the ability to engage with whatever committee or at EMA these procedures are running very quickly, and we all share that goal and that aim of the pharmacovigilance legislation. So I think what we're concerned at times is not seeing the ability to fully engage and to know how to engage on very valid scientific topics. So that's one element. And of course, the second element that is very difficult, and I think that would be great to look at some simplification, is implementation. It is a monster of a task to implement some of the things that are being very thoroughly reviewed and assessed. But then when that implementation phase starts, we do see gaps and we do see issues. So it would be very interesting going forward to work with you to see how we can close some of those gaps and make that process a little bit more efficient. Thank you.